Hello and welcome to this episode of the Burns Guide. Today we'll be looking at the Horatian satire To a Louse. We will first read the poem, then analyse its craft, context and resonance.
Ha! Where ye going, ye crowlin' fairly? Your impudence protects ye sairly. I canna say but ye strunt rarely o'er gauze and lace, though faith, I fear ye dine but sparely on sic a place. Ye ugly creepin' blast it wanner, detest it, shunned by sont and sinner. How dare ye set your fit upon her, sae fine a lady? Gae somewhere else and seek your dinner on some poor body. Swith, in some beggar's half-it squattle, there ye may creep and sprawl and sprattle wi' other kindred jumping cattle and shawls and nations, where horn nor bane ne'er dare unsettle your thick plantations. Noo, hud ye there, you're out o' sicht, below the fatrel snug and ticht. Na faith ye yet, you'll no be richt till you've got on it the very tapmost towering hicht of Mrs. Bonnet. My sooth, richt bald ye set your nose out, as plump and grey as ony grows it. Oh, for some rank mercurial roset, or fell red smedum, I'd gie ye sic a hearty dozy it would dress your drawdom. I wadna been surprised to spy on an old wife's flainin' toy, or Abelin some bit dubby boy on's wily coat. But Mrs. Fine Lenardi, fie, how dare ye do it? Oh, Jenny, dinna toss your heed, and set your beauties o' a breed. Ye little ken what cursed speed the blastie's makin'. They winks and finger ends I dreed unnoticed tackin'. Oh, wad some poor the gifty gie us, to see ourselves as others see us. It wad frae mony a blunder free us, and foolish notion, what airs and dress and gait wad lea us, and even devotion.
The poem employs the standard Happy form, with an AAA-BAB rhyming scheme, with two shorter B lines containing 2 metrical feet, compared with the A lines which contain 4 metrical feet. The form is used frequently by Burns to generate momentum in the verse. In To a Louse, Burns fuses different regional dialects of Scots, both Lowlands and Doric. The poem opens with the exclamation "Ha!". The joke here is that from the title of the poem, we know that the setting is a church, and we should be quietly praying or listening to a sermon. Burns has just shattered this silence. The exclamation also serves to draw us into the poem, as we become absorbed in that sense of immediacy, as if we are sat on the pew next to Burns, simultaneously watching the action of the louse unfold and Burns's reaction to it. A further 4 stanzas employ the same technique as we track the progress of the louse. Burns, in mock outrage, wants to know where the louse thinks it's going. The tone of his question is authoritative and demanding, a very different tone when compared with the narrator's sympathetic tone in To a Mouse. Here the louse has no sympathy, it is impudent to strunt over gauze and lace. In other words, the louse doesn't seem to know its place in the world. In the next stanza, Burns reinforces the nature of the louse as a lowly outcast with a tirade of demeaning adjectives. Nevertheless, it merits the title Wonner, or Wonder. There is something fascinating about this detestable creature. Again he asks the louse to explain itself. How does it dare to set its foot upon such a fine lady? Here, lady is italicized, an emphasis that serves as a wink, an indication of Burns's irony. Our first indication that the lady in question is maybe not as high on the social ladder as she would like to be. Burns suggests to the louse that it should find a poor person to feed on instead. In the third stanza, Burns tells the louse that it may at will sprawl and sprattle on a beggar's haffet or temple. The repetition of the sp sounds helps to portray the narrator's disgust, as if he's spitting at the creature. On the beggar, the louse can happily roam in shoals or even nations. This choice of word personifies lice. Perhaps lice aren't so different to humans after all. On the beggar, their thick plantations, he says, will not be disturbed. Plantations is an extremely loaded word to see here. Slavery was clearly playing on Burns's mind, as we will see in the context section of our analysis. The word plantations portrays these personified lice as a repressed race, an underclass of society, detested and shunned by saint and sinner alike. The fourth stanza doesn't start with an exclamation, but in its stead we have, "Now hud you there, now hold you there." It produces the same effect, as if the action is unfolding in the here and now. The louse moves behind the ribbons of the bonnet momentarily, but then to Burns's mock outrage re-emerges, attempting to climb to the very top of the bonnet. Burns uses the word miss to reinforce the idea that its host is a refined lady. As the louse literally climbs, so too does it attempt to climb metaphorically. The idea that the louse is a social climber, attempting to rise above its station in life as a lowly slave or impoverished outcast. In the fifth stanza, we are told the louse sticks its nose out, again reminding us of its daring impudence. Burns tells the louse if only he had some insect repellent or some other form of insecticide, he would give it a thrashing. The nature of the threat, "dress your drawdom," reinforces the comical satire of the piece. Burns tells the louse in the sixth stanza that he wouldn't be surprised to see it on an old wife's cap or a poor boy's vest. When speaking about its host, he repeats the title, Miss, and bolsters the idea of her elegance when he tells us that this bonnet is not just any bonnet, but a Leonardi, the height of a fashion craze inspired by the hot air balloonist Vincenzo Leonardi. Burns suggests, through this particular choice of garment, that the woman might have an inflated opinion of herself. The illusion Burns has created for this fine lady is shattered in the seventh stanza when he calls her for the first time by the humble name Jenny instead of the title Miss or Lady. Just like the louse, Jenny is a social climber, attempting to rise higher in her Leonardi. Her inflated status is burst, and she comes plummeting back to reality. She is merely a country girl who is misinterpreting the winks and pointed fingers as admiration for her beautiful bonnet, when really they are taking note of the lice on her head. In response to all the attention, she vainly tosses her hair, only to set the lice abroad with cursed speed. Burns, having turned his attention from the louse to Jenny, now reflects on a larger scale, on himself and the rest of society, implicating us all with the repetition of us at the end of 4 lines in the final stanza. He prays, "Would some power, i.e. God, give us the gift to see ourselves through the eyes of others." After all, Jenny is not the only guilty party here of a lack of self-awareness. What is Burns doing if not gawking at the nape of a young woman's neck rather than listening to the sermon? And the others are too busy gossiping and pointing out poor Jenny's head lice to be the beneficiaries of any spiritual salvation. This gift, if given from on high, Burns says, would free us all from foolish notions of vanity, ignorance, and conceit. And crucially, in the final line, he calls into question the devotion of the churchgoers. Perhaps some only go to church to show off their fancy hats and put on a social pretense. Without the desire to do so, their devotion to the church would leave them as fast as their airs and graces. On the 5th of October, 1785, Vincenzo Leonardi made his first balloon flight in Scotland, from George Heriot's school in Edinburgh over the Firth of Forth to Cooper in Fife. Later that year, on the 23rd of November, he would fly from Glasgow to Hawick. He was not the first balloonist to fly in Scotland. James Tytler, who would go on to collaborate with Burns, became the first in Britain to take to the air in Edinburgh in 1784. But it was the extravagant Italian aeronaut who would garner fame and celebrity. A fashion craze ensued for Leonardi dresses and bonnets inspired by the balloons that became immensely popular in Scotland. To a Louse was written not long after Leonardi had taken to the air in Scotland in late 1785. Burns was working at the time on his Mosgiel tenant farm in Mauchline. However, he was already contemplating moving to Jamaica to work on a slave plantation as a bookkeeper. This had nothing to do with keeping books, but was in fact a euphemism for a slave driver. Burns decided against travelling to Jamaica. The publication and subsequent success of his poems, chiefly in the Scottish dialect the following year, encouraged him to stay in Scotland. For the time being, Burns was writing poetry prolifically. He had only recently written one of his most celebrated poems, To a Mouse, and was now turning his attention from the minute to the minuscule. Jenny, or Jean Markland, a shopkeeper's daughter, would simply be collateral damage for his satirical masterpiece. As can be seen in To a Mouse, Burns was reading Adam Smith's Theory of Moral Sentiments, published in 1753. The Theory of Moral Sentiments discusses at length the role of what Smith calls the impartial spectator. He sees this as a tool to understanding morality. We know an action is moral or virtuous, he argues, if an imagined person who is completely impartial would nevertheless sympathise with the action. In the poem To a Louse, Burns makes use of the impartial spectator to cast his poetic wit against society. The following passage can be found in Chapter 4, Part 3 of the Theory of Moral Sentiments, of the nature of self-deceit. It is so disagreeable to think ill of ourselves that we often purposely turn away our view from those circumstances which might render that judgment unfavourable. He is a bold surgeon, they say, whose hand does not tremble when he performs an operation upon his own person, and he is often equally bold who does not hesitate to pull off the mysterious veil of self-delusion which covers from his view the deformities of his own conduct. This self-deceit, this fatal weakness of mankind, is the source of half the disorders of human life. If we saw ourselves in the light in which others see us, or in which they would see us if they knew all, a reformation would generally be unavoidable. We could not otherwise endure the sight. We live in a time when almost every single person projects themselves not only in the physical world through the way we talk, dress, and act, but also online into the digital world. Social media is the new church service where people put on their Sunday best and try to garner likes and shares. If Jenny were around today, you can easily imagine her as a wannabe influencer, sharing a selfie online wearing whatever happens to be in vogue. We so desperately want to be admired and approved of by society that we try to project a perfect construction of ourselves and our lives online. The truth that Burns observes in To a Louse is that beneath these pretenses we are all only human and therefore subject to the same slings and arrows, the same misfortunes and the same slips in our conduct. For Jenny, it may be a case of misplaced vanity and an unfortunate louse, but in the modern world the louse could easily symbolise an addiction, an eating disorder, or an abusive relationship, which everyone can see except for the person themselves. There are many things we would rather not see in ourselves, and so stay in a state of denial. If we were more willing to analyse our flaws and our problems as much as we try to showcase our strengths and achievements, we, as a society, could all be a little healthier and happier.